No one in Greyhaven Castle dared speak about the sounds beneath the oldest stone tower. When winter settled across the kingdom and the mountain winds wrapped themselves around the castle walls, a deep, lonely howl always rose from somewhere below the stone floors. It was never loud enough to wake the entire fortress, yet it always found the ears of those lying awake in the darkness. The sound drifted through cold corridors like a forgotten prayer, carrying so much sorrow that even the crackling fireplaces seemed to grow quiet whenever it echoed through the ancient halls. The servants crossed themselves whenever they heard it. The guards pretended not to notice. The nobles laughed whenever anyone mentioned it. But no one ever went looking for its source. They all knew the old stories. The Western Tower had been sealed long before any of them were born. Hidden beneath it lay a place older than the castle itself, a prison built not for thieves or murderers, but for something far more dangerous. Or so they believed. Then, on one snow-covered night, a young servant girl carrying nothing more than a lantern and a bundle of firewood followed the haunting cry into the darkness. She expected to find a monster. Instead, she found a wolf wrapped in rusted chains, his golden eyes carrying a grief so deep that it looked older than the kingdom itself. Outside the castle walls, wolves gathered beneath the full moon without making a sound. Around the wolf's neck rested an iron collar engraved with a royal crest no one had seen in nearly 30 years. Someone had erased a king from history. But the mountain had never forgotten. Winter arrived early in Greyhaven. Snow covered every rooftop until the castle seemed carved from ice instead of stone. Frost crept across stained glass windows, and every breath became visible in the morning air. Long before sunrise, servants hurried through narrow corridors carrying buckets of water, baskets of bread, and stacks of freshly chopped wood to keep the great halls warm. Among them walked Elena. She moved quietly, almost unnoticed, wrapped in a faded grey cloak several winters older than she was. No embroidered dress. No silver jewelry. No family crest. Only worn leather boots, rough hands, and kind eyes that seemed incapable of passing suffering without stopping. She had lived inside Greyhaven Castle for nearly 15 years. She remembered almost nothing of the village where she had been born. Only flashes remained. A small wooden cottage. The smell of fresh bread cooling beside an open window. Her mother's gentle laughter. Her father's warm hands lifting her onto his shoulders. Then came the plague. Cold. Silence. Empty houses. The village bells ringing without celebration. She had survived because an old merchant traveling toward Greyhaven found her sitting alone beside the frozen well where her parents had once drawn water every morning. The castle had taken her in. Not as family. Not as a guest. Simply another servant. Years passed quietly. Elena never complained. She washed dishes until her fingers cracked from icy water. She swept endless corridors while nobles argued over feasts she would never taste. She polished armor that belonged to men who never learned her name. Yet somehow, despite everything life had taken from her, bitterness never found a home inside her heart. Instead, kindness did. Whenever a stable horse limped, Elena stayed after sunset to clean its wound. When abandoned puppies wandered near the kitchens, she secretly carried scraps beneath her apron. Even the smallest birds with broken wings somehow found their way into the tiny room beneath the castle roof where she slept. Her room was barely larger than a pantry. A narrow bed. One wooden chair. A cracked wash basin. A tiny window overlooking the snowy mountains. But each morning birds gathered outside that little window, singing long before the castle bells announced the new day. Some servants smiled whenever they passed her. Others shook their heads. One day, an old cook often muttered while kneading bread, "That girl will try saving something that cannot be saved." Elena only smiled. "If it's still breathing," she would answer softly, "there's always hope." The old cook never argued. He simply sighed and handed her another warm loaf to hide beneath her cloak for whichever hungry creature she happened to find next. Not everyone admired her kindness. Lord Malric certainly did not. He ruled Greyhaven in the king's absence, though few remembered exactly when that absence had begun. Tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed in dark velvet lined with silver thread, Malric carried himself as though every room already belonged to him before he entered it. His smile never reached his eyes. Whenever servants lowered their heads, He expected them to lower them farther. Whenever villagers pleaded for mercy during harsh winters, he answered with heavier taxes. Mercy, he often said, made kingdoms weak. One afternoon Elena crossed the courtyard carrying grain toward the stables when she noticed a young stable boy kneeling beside an exhausted old mare. The horse struggled to stand. One front leg trembled beneath her weight. Before Elena reached them, Malric appeared beside the stable doors. He looked at the aging animal only once. "She's useless." The stable boy's face turned pale. "My lord, she carried soldiers for nearly 20 years. Then she has already served her purpose." The stable boy swallowed hard. "What should I do?" Malric answered without slowing his stride. "End it." His boots disappeared across the courtyard. Silence remained. The boy stared helplessly at the horse. Elena slowly knelt beside him. The mare's breathing came unevenly. Snowflakes settled across her grey muzzle. Elena gently stroked her neck. "Give me tonight." The boy looked uncertain. "If Lord Malric finds out." "He won't." That evening she spent hours cleaning infected wounds hidden beneath the horse's winter coat. She mixed herbs gathered from the castle gardens with warm water until a soothing paste formed between her fingers. The mare never kicked, never pulled away. She simply rested her heavy head against Elena's shoulder as though she understood. When sunrise came, the horse stood without trembling. The stable boy laughed through tears. "You saved her." Elena smiled. "No." She rubbed the mare's nose gently. She decided not to give up. Far above them, hidden behind an arched window overlooking the courtyard, Lord Malric watched everything. His expression never changed, but his eyes narrowed. Compassion irritated him. It spread. Like fire. Or disease. Later that evening the castle prepared for another snowstorm. Servants rushed through kitchens while cooks stirred steaming pots of stew. The smell of roasted onions, fresh bread, and burning oak drifted through the halls. Outside, the sky darkened long before sunset. Clouds rolled over the mountains like black waves swallowing every trace of daylight. The first gust struck the castle walls with enough force to rattle every wooden shutter. By nightfall, snow buried the outer roads. No traveler would reach Greyhaven until morning. Perhaps not even then. Elena carried a bundle of firewood toward the western wing where several fireplaces had gone cold. Few servants liked working there after sunset. The western tower had stood abandoned for generations. Dust covered its empty halls. Ancient portraits stared from cracked walls. Long curtains moved although every window remained locked. Stories lived there. Stories whispered from one servant generation to another. They spoke of a beast sleeping beneath the tower. A curse. A forgotten prison. No one agreed on the details. Only one warning remained unchanged. Never follow the sound. Elena reached the final fireplace and knelt to place another log onto the dying flames. The room fell silent. Even the wind outside seemed to stop. Then it came. A howl. Deep. Broken. Not fierce. Not hungry. Lonely. The sound rose through the stone beneath her feet. It lingered only a heartbeat before fading into silence once more. Elena slowly stood. Her lantern flickered. Another howl answered. Closer this time. Not from outside. From below. Every instinct told her to leave. Instead, she lifted the lantern higher. "Dogs don't cry like that," she whispered. The corridor stretched ahead, empty except for shadows dancing along the walls. The howl came again. Somewhere beneath the ancient tower. Elena followed. Her footsteps echoed softly over worn stone. Dust drifted through the lantern light like tiny stars. She passed broken statues whose faces had long since crumbled away. Spider webs hung between cracked pillars. The deeper she walked, the colder the air became. Soon her breath floated before her face. Then she noticed something strange. Fresh footprints. Not many. Only a few. Leading toward the oldest wall inside the tower. She brushed away layers of dust. Her fingers struck iron. A rusted ring. Pulling with all her strength, she heard hidden gears groan beneath the stone. The wall shuddered. Slowly, almost unwillingly, it slid aside. A staircase spiraled downward into complete darkness. Cold air rushed upward carrying the scent of damp earth, ancient iron, and something else. Something alive. The lantern flame trembled. Far below, metal scraped against stone. Clang! 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 The sound of chains moving. Elena tightened her grip on the lantern and placed one careful foot upon the first worn step. The staircase seemed endless. Each turn swallowed more light behind her. Water dripped steadily from unseen cracks overhead. The walls narrowed until her shoulders nearly brushed the ancient stone. The deeper she descended, the louder the breathing became. Slow. Heavy. Painfully tired. Finally, the staircase opened into a vast underground chamber. Her lantern revealed broken pillars disappearing into darkness. Old torches, long extinguished. Massive iron rings fixed into the floor. Then, two golden eyes opened. They reflected the lantern light before the rest of the creature emerged from the darkness. A wolf. Larger than any Elena had ever imagined. His black fur was matted with dust and dried blood. Thick iron chains wrapped around his neck, shoulders, and front legs, anchoring him to the stone floor with enormous rusted spikes. Old scars crossed his body like faded memories. One ear had been torn. His breathing came slowly, each breath sounding heavier than the last. Yet it wasn't his size that stole Elena's voice. It was his eyes. There was no wild fury inside them. No hunger. No hatred. Only unbearable sorrow, and the quiet dignity of someone who had suffered for far too long without ever forgetting who he once was. The great wolf slowly lifted his head. Their eyes met across the darkness. For a long moment, neither one moved. Then, with a faint rattle of chains, the wolf lowered his head, not in defeat, but almost in greeting. And in that silent moment, Elena realized she was not looking into the eyes of a beast. She was looking into the eyes of someone waiting for hope. Elena did not remember climbing the endless staircase back to the castle. Her hands still trembled around the lantern, though not from the cold. The image of those golden eyes remained with her through every narrow corridor and every familiar doorway. She had seen wounded animals before. She knew the look of pain, the quiet surrender that came when hope had almost disappeared. But the wolf beneath the western tower had looked at her differently. Not as prey. Not as an enemy. As though he had spent years waiting for someone who would not turn away. Outside her small attic window, snow drifted gently across the rooftops. Dawn had begun to soften the eastern sky, painting the frozen mountains with pale silver light. The castle slowly woke. Kitchen bells rang. Stable doors creaked open. The smell of fresh bread floated through the corridors. Life continued exactly as it always had. Only Elena felt different. She washed wooden bowls beside the kitchen hearth, yet every few moments her thoughts wandered back beneath the castle. She remembered the deep wounds cutting across the wolf's shoulders, the rust covering the ancient chains, the slow rise and fall of his breathing, and the loneliness in his eyes. Old Marta, the head cook, noticed her silence while kneading dough. "You've stirred that same pot for nearly 10 minutes, the elderly woman said with a smile. Elena blinked. She had completely forgotten what she was doing. "I'm sorry." Marta wiped flour from her hands. "Something is troubling you." Elena hesitated. She wanted to speak. To ask about the Western Tower. About forgotten prisons. About wolves. But something deep inside warned her not to. Instead, she quietly answered, "I heard someone crying last night." Marta's smile disappeared. She looked toward the kitchen doorway to make certain no one else stood nearby. "Some cries," she whispered, "are meant to stay unheard." Before Elena could ask another question, another servant hurried into the kitchen. "The Lord is inspecting the storerooms." Immediately, everyone returned to work. Conversations vanished as quickly as smoke. By afternoon, Elena found herself carrying baskets toward the marketplace outside the castle walls. Greyhaven village rested beneath the fortress like a collection of warm lights gathered against the endless snow. Wooden cottages lined narrow streets where blacksmiths hammered glowing steel and children chased one another through fresh drifts despite the biting wind. Yet something unusual caught her attention. People had stopped talking. One by one they turned toward the distant forest. Standing between the snow-covered pines were wolves. 6 of them. Perhaps 7. They stood perfectly still. No growling. No pacing. No hunting. They simply watched the castle. Even the village dogs remained strangely quiet. A hunter standing beside the well frowned. They've been coming every full moon. Another villager crossed himself. They're waiting. For what? The old hunter slowly shook his head. I've hunted these forests for 40 years. He never looked away from the wolves. I've never seen wolves behave like that. A sudden shout from the castle gates scattered everyone's attention. The wolves disappeared into the forest without making a sound. It was as though the trees themselves had swallowed them. That night the storm returned. Snow struck the castle walls in thick waves while icy wind howled through every crack in the ancient stone. Elena wrapped a loaf of fresh bread inside a cloth. Then another. She quietly borrowed dried herbs from the kitchen shelves and filled a small wooden flask with warm broth. Her heart beat harder with every careful step toward the abandoned tower. If anyone discovered where she was going, she already knew the punishment. Still she continued. The hidden doorway opened with the same grinding groan. The ancient staircase welcomed her once more. Darkness closed around her as she descended deeper beneath Grey Haven. The chamber looked unchanged. Only the silence felt heavier. The wolf lay exactly where she had left him. His breathing had grown weaker. One chain had rubbed so deeply against his shoulder that fresh blood stained the stone beneath him. Elena slowly placed the lantern on the floor. I brought food. Her voice echoed softly through the underground hall. The wolf raised his head. Golden eyes found hers almost immediately. For a long moment neither moved. Then, instead of lunging forward, the great wolf carefully lowered himself until his enormous body rested against the cold stone. Almost as if trying not to frighten her. Elena stepped closer. Every instinct warned her she was standing within reach of a creature capable of ending her life in a single heartbeat. Yet nothing about him felt cruel. Only exhausted. She placed the bread beside him. The wolf sniffed it. He did not eat. Instead, he looked back at her. Only when Elena gently nodded did he finally take the loaf between his teeth. Even then he ate slowly. Almost politely. As though he remembered table manners from another life. A strange thought entered Elena's mind. She laughed quietly at herself. Wolves don't wait for permission. The great beast finished eating before lifting one heavy paw. The chain rattled loudly. Its iron links had worn deep into his skin. Without thinking, Elena reached toward the wound. The wolf stiffened. She stopped immediately. I'm sorry. She slowly withdrew her hand. You've probably forgotten what kindness feels like. For several long breaths nothing happened. Then, the wolf stretched his injured paw toward her. Only a few inches. Enough. Elena looked into his eyes. She understood. Carefully, she cleaned the wound with warm water and crushed herbs. The wolf never growled. Never pulled away. His muscles tightened each time the water touched broken flesh, yet he remained completely still. When she finished wrapping the wound with clean cloth, the great beast lowered his enormous head until it rested beside her knee. Not in submission. In trust. A single tear escaped Elena's eye before she could stop it. Who did this to you? The wolf closed his eyes. The chamber became silent once again. Only the soft crackle of her lantern disturbed the darkness. Before leaving, Elena noticed something she had missed the night before. Around the wolf's neck hung a thick iron collar hidden beneath layers of black fur. Most of it had rusted with age. Yet one small section remained visible. She gently brushed away dirt with her sleeve. An engraving appeared. A crown. Encircled by 2 wolves standing beneath a full moon. Her breath caught. She had seen that symbol before. Long ago. Not in the castle. In one of the oldest history books stored inside the forgotten library where no servant bothered dusting the shelves. It had belonged to the first royal family. The crest disappeared from every banner nearly 30 years ago. Official records claimed the old king died without leaving an heir. Why would that forgotten symbol be hanging around the neck of a chained wolf? The question followed Elena all the way back upstairs. The following days passed beneath growing unease. Lord Malric's temper darkened. Servants whispered that food had been disappearing from the kitchens. Guards searched empty storerooms. Several workers were questioned. One stable hand was beaten after being accused of stealing meat. Elena lowered her eyes whenever Malric passed. She could almost feel him watching. One evening, as snow melted briefly beneath an unexpected warm wind, Malric stood in the castle courtyard addressing his captain of the guard. "Someone has entered the western tower." The captain frowned. "No one goes there, my lord." "They do now." Malric held up a torn strip of cloth. Grey wool. The same color as a servant's cloak. "I found this caught beneath the hidden doorway." His voice became colder. "The one feeding that creature has forgotten something." He looked toward the castle windows. "I intend to discover who." Elena felt the color leave her face. Without realizing it, she reached for the edge of her cloak. A narrow piece of fabric was missing near the hem. That night she avoided the tower. Then another night passed. Then another. Each evening guilt settled heavier upon her heart. She imagined the wolf waiting, listening, wondering why the only visitor he had known in years had suddenly disappeared. On the fourth night she could bear it no longer. She returned. The chamber greeted her with silence. The wolf remained alive, but weaker. His breathing came slowly. The untouched water bowl stood frozen beside him. "I'm sorry," Elena whispered, kneeling beside him. "I couldn't come." The wolf opened his eyes. He did not show anger. He simply looked at her. Then, with surprising effort, he nudged the empty bowl toward her with his nose. Elena smiled through tears. "You still trust me?" She filled the bowl from her flask. The wolf drank quietly. Afterward, something unexpected happened. He slowly stood. Every chain groaned under his weight. Instead of facing her, he turned toward the far wall of the chamber. There, almost completely hidden beneath centuries of dust and hanging vines that had somehow crept through cracks in the stone, stood an enormous carved relief. Elena lifted her lantern. The dust shimmered in the light. She brushed away years of dirt with both hands. Little by little, an ancient mural emerged from the darkness. It showed wolves running beside armored men wearing crowns. Not attacking. Protecting. A great white wolf stood beside a king whose raised sword pointed not toward an enemy, but toward the rising sun. Above them were carved words so worn they had almost vanished. Elena traced the faded letters with trembling fingers. "The crown walks only with the guardians of the mountain." Below that image came another. The same king. The same wolves. Only now flames consumed a great castle while shadowed figures wrapped heavy chains around a kneeling wolf. One figure wore a noble's crown. Another held a broken royal banner. Someone had not only imprisoned a king. They had buried the truth with him. Behind Elena, the great black wolf released a low, sorrowful sound that echoed through the forgotten chamber. It was not the cry of an animal. It was the sound of a memory too painful to die. And somewhere above them, beyond layers of ancient stone, footsteps echoed through the abandoned western tower. Someone else had entered the darkness. The footsteps above did not hurry. They came slowly, one after another, each echo sinking through the ancient stone like drops of water falling into a deep well. Elena instinctively lowered the lantern flame with trembling fingers. The underground chamber disappeared into deeper shadow. Only the wolf's golden eyes remained visible, glowing softly in the darkness. For several long moments, neither of them moved. Dust drifted lazily through the cold air while the unseen visitor paused somewhere above the hidden staircase. Then, the footsteps turned away. The silence returned. Elena released the breath she had been holding. The great wolf looked toward the ceiling for another moment before slowly lowering his head again. His ears remained alert, listening to sounds far beyond human hearing. "Someone knows," Elena whispered. The wolf closed his eyes briefly, as though he had feared this moment for many years. She looked back at the mural. The carved figures seemed almost alive beneath the lantern's glow. Time had worn away many details, but not enough to erase the truth hidden within the stone. The wolves had never been enemies of the crown. They had once stood beside it. Why had the kingdom forgotten? Or perhaps, who had made them forget? Sleep refused to visit Elena that night. She lay beneath her thin blanket, listening to the wind scrape across the castle roof. Each time she closed her eyes, she saw the mural again. The chained wolf. The burning castle. The royal crest. By dawn she had made a decision. If the answers no longer lived inside Greyhaven Castle, perhaps they still survived somewhere beyond its walls. 2 mornings later, Lord Malric ordered several servants to deliver sacks of grain to St. Elian Monastery, a quiet stone sanctuary resting high among the eastern hills. Elena volunteered before anyone else could speak. Malric barely looked at her. "Be back before sunset." "Yes, my lord." Snow still covered the mountain roads, though spring had begun its slow battle against winter. Water trickled beneath sheets of ice. Bare branches swayed gently above narrow forest paths. Small birds returned one by one, their songs sounding almost forgotten after months of silence. The monastery appeared shortly after noon. Unlike Greyhaven Castle, it possessed no grand towers. Only weathered stone walls. A tiny bell tower. Gardens sleeping beneath melting snow. The scent of pine and fresh herbs lingered peacefully in the crisp mountain air. An elderly monk welcomed the servants with gentle eyes and a warm smile. His name was Brother Aldrin. His white beard reached nearly to his chest, and years had bent his back without dimming the quiet strength in his face. While the other servants unloaded supplies, Elena wandered toward the monastery library, where narrow windows filled the room with soft afternoon light. Hundreds of ancient books rested upon wooden shelves darkened by age. Maps, chronicles, songs, histories. Many looked untouched for decades. Brother Aldrin quietly joined her. "You seem to be searching for something." Elena hesitated. "I don't know exactly what." The old monk smiled knowingly. Sometimes the heart begins searching before the mind understands why. His gaze rested on a faded book lying open upon a nearby table. It contained drawings of wolves. Not hunting. Standing beside kings. Elena's heart skipped. "I've seen that crest." Brother Aldrin's expression changed. The warmth in his face became careful concern. "Where?" She glanced toward the library door. "No one can hear us." The old monk gently closed the heavy wooden door. Only then did Elena speak. "There is a wolf beneath Greyhaven Castle." Silence filled the room. Not surprised silence. The kind carried by someone who had feared hearing those words for many years. Brother Aldrin slowly closed his eyes. "So?" he whispered. "He still lives." Elena stared at him. "You know about him?" The old monk walked toward the fireplace before answering. For several moments he simply watched the flames. "When I was a young novice," he finally said, "an old traveler came to this monastery during the deepest winter I had ever seen. He was wounded, frightened, and dying. He carried something hidden beneath his cloak." Brother Aldrin carefully opened an old wooden chest beside the hearth. Inside rested a weathered scroll wrapped in faded blue cloth. He handled it as gently as though touching someone's memory. "I promised never to destroy this." He unrolled the parchment. Its edges had yellowed with age. Yet the drawing at its center remained unmistakable. A young king. Dark-haired. Strong. Wearing a silver crown. Beside him stood a magnificent black wolf whose golden eyes seemed almost identical to those Elena had seen beneath the castle. The names written beneath the illustration made her breath catch. King Rowan of Greyhaven. Guardian of the mountain wolves. Elena looked up. But King Rowan died. Brother Aldrin slowly shook his head. "No. He disappeared." The kingdom merely accepted a different story. The old monk invited Elena to sit beside the fire. Outside, bells echoed gently across the snowy hills. Inside, another history slowly awakened. Many years ago, before Elena had been born, Greyhaven had flourished beneath King Rowan's rule. The rivers had run clear. Harvests rarely failed. Travelers crossed the kingdom without fear. The forests remained untouched because Rowan believed the mountain belonged as much to its wolves as to its people. The old tradition spoke of a sacred bond between the royal bloodline and the guardians of the wild. Every king chosen by the ancient spirits earned the trust of the wolves. Not through power. Never through fear. Only through compassion. They say, Brother Aldrin said softly, that wolves can hear the truth inside a human heart. Elena thought immediately of the chained wolf lowering his head beside her. He trusted me. Brother Aldrin nodded. Then the old bond still survives. The fire crackled quietly. But good kingdoms often attract ambitious men. The warmth left the old monk's voice. There was one noble above all others. Lord Cedric Malric. Elena frowned. The father of... Yes. The father of the man ruling Greyhaven today. Brother Aldrin's weathered hands tightened around the scroll. Cedric desired the throne. He knew no army could defeat Rowan. So he chose another weapon. Betrayal. On the night remembered in forgotten songs as the Moon of Ashes, Rowan was invited to a gathering celebrating peace among the Northern Lords. Instead, he walked into a trap. Trusted nobles surrounded him. Ancient sorcerers, loyal to Cedric, used forbidden magic no honest ruler would ever allow. They did not kill Rowan. Death would have made him a martyr. Instead, they cursed him. Bone twisted. Hands became paws. His voice vanished beneath the howl of a wolf. Brother Aldrin looked toward the snow falling outside the monastery windows. The curse could never destroy who he truly was. So they chained him beneath the castle. They erased his name from history. They burned every record they could find. And Cedric crowned himself protector of Greyhaven until a new ruler could be chosen. That day never came. Elena's fingers trembled. They imprisoned him for 30 years. The old monk slowly nodded. Long enough for children to become parents. Long enough for truth to become legend. Long enough for people to stop asking questions. A heavy silence settled between them. Elena imagined the endless years beneath the mountain. No sunlight. No seasons. Only chains. Only darkness. Only memories. She could scarcely breathe. But, she whispered, if the curse was cast by magic, why hasn't anyone broken it? Brother Aldrin looked thoughtfully into the flames. Because the curse feeds upon hatred. He lifted another parchment from the chest. Its faded writing had nearly disappeared. The ancient spell cannot be broken by swords. It cannot be broken by armies. It weakens only when someone freely offers compassion where hatred is expected. Elena stared at him. She remembered cleaning Rowan's wounds. Sharing food. Speaking kindly. The wolf had changed. His eyes had grown brighter. His strength had slowly returned. Brother Aldrin smiled gently. You have already begun freeing him. A sudden knock shattered the peaceful silence. One of the younger monks rushed inside, breathing hard. Brother Aldrin. The young monk's face had turned pale. Soldiers. The old monk stood immediately. Whose soldiers? The answer came before anyone spoke. Heavy boots thundered across the monastery courtyard. Steel clanged against stone. Horses snorted outside the gates. Brother Aldrin's face grew grave. He found us. The monastery doors burst open. Lord Malric stepped inside surrounded by armored guards. Snow clung to his black cloak. His sharp eyes swept across the library until they settled upon Elena. So? His voice remained calm. This is where you've been hiding your curiosity. The room became deathly still. Brother Aldrin stepped forward. My lord, this is sacred ground. Malric smiled faintly. Sacred lies are still lies. His gaze shifted toward the open scroll lying on the table. Without warning, he snatched it from the wood. Brother Aldrin reached out. No. Too late. Malric tossed the ancient parchment into the fire. Flame swallowed 30 years of hidden history in seconds. Elena instinctively rushed forward, but 2 guards seized her arms. No, she cried. The old monk watched countless forgotten names curl into black ash. His shoulders sagged with heartbreaking sorrow. Some truths, Malric said coldly, should remain buried. He turned toward the guards. Search everything. Shelves crashed to the floor. Books scattered. Ancient records tore beneath iron boots. Dust filled the air. The peaceful monastery echoed with destruction. Brother Aldrin closed his eyes, whispering a silent prayer. Then he looked directly at Elena. For only a heartbeat. Yet she understood. Run. Before they find everything. Before they find Rowan. As the guards overturned another shelf, a sudden crash echoed from the far side of the library. The distraction lasted only an instant. But it was enough. Elena tore free from the startled soldiers and sprinted through a narrow side passage. Behind her, Malric's furious voice thundered through the monastery. Don't let her escape. She burst into the freezing afternoon, snow stinging her face as she raced toward the pine forest. Branches whipped against her cloak. Her boots slipped across icy ground. The shouts of pursuing soldiers grew louder. Then, from somewhere deep within the trees came a long, powerful howl. Another answered. Then another. Dark shapes emerged silently between the pines. Not one wolf. Not two. An entire pack. The soldiers froze. Golden eyes watched from every direction. And at the front of the pack stood a magnificent white she-wolf, her scarred face lifted proudly toward Elena, as if the guardians of the mountain had finally come to escort the last hope of their forgotten king. The forest held its breath. Snowflakes drifted silently between towering pines, settling upon branches so ancient they seemed older than the kingdom itself. The icy wind that had chased Elena through the mountain trails suddenly faded, replaced by a silence so complete she could hear her own heartbeat pounding inside her chest. The soldiers heard it too. Not the heartbeat. The silence. Hunters often said the forest became quiet only for two reasons. Either every creature had fled, or every creature was watching. Lord Malric's captain slowly raised his sword. The polished steel reflected dozens of golden eyes appearing one after another among the trees. They did not rush forward. They did not growl. They simply stepped into view. Grey wolves. Black wolves. Old wolves carrying scars across their muzzles. Young wolves whose thick winter coats shimmered beneath the pale afternoon light. Within moments, nearly 20 wolves stood between Elena and the soldiers. The forest had become a living wall. No command was given. No challenge was spoken. The wolves merely waited. One nervous soldier swallowed hard. There are too many. Another tightened his grip on his spear. They're surrounding us. The captain forced confidence into his voice. They're only beasts. His words sounded far less convincing than he intended. From somewhere behind the pack came the steady crunch of approaching footsteps. The wolves slowly lowered their heads. Not in fear. In respect. A magnificent white she-wolf emerged from between two towering cedars. Age had silvered her thick fur, yet she carried herself with quiet authority. Deep scars crossed her shoulder and one ear had been torn long ago, but nothing about her suggested weakness. Her pale blue eyes moved calmly across the frightened soldiers before settling upon Elena. For a long moment, neither moved. Elena's breathing slowed. The she-wolf stepped closer. One careful step. Then another. Close enough for Elena to see tiny snowflakes resting upon the animal's whiskers. The great wolf lifted her nose. Gently. She touched Elena's trembling hand. Warm breath drifted across Elena's frozen fingers. The young servant closed her eyes. Without thinking, she rested her hand against the wolf's neck. The thick winter fur felt softer than she had imagined. Around them, every other wolf relaxed. Several quietly sat upon the snow. One old grey wolf even lay down beside the trail, as though announcing that no harm would come while the white guardian stood there. Behind them, the soldiers stared in speechless disbelief. "I've never seen anything like this," one whispered. The captain stepped backward. He had hunted wolves before. He knew fear. He also knew respect. This was neither. This was something older. Something no sword could command. The white she-wolf turned away from Elena and looked toward the soldiers. She released one deep, commanding growl. Not loud. Not threatening. Certain. The meaning needed no translation. Leave. No wolf moved. No teeth were bared. The captain slowly lowered his sword. "We're leaving." One soldier protested. "But Lord Malric," I said. He never looked away from the wolves. "We're leaving." None argued again. The soldiers retreated one cautious step at a time until the forest swallowed them from sight. Only when the final sound of armored footsteps disappeared did the wolves begin moving again. The white she-wolf glanced back at Elena. Then she started walking deeper into the mountains. After only a few steps, she paused. Waiting. Elena understood. They wanted her to follow. The journey lasted until sunset. The wolves guided her along narrow paths hidden beneath heavy snow, crossing frozen streams and climbing rocky slopes no ordinary traveler would ever notice. The deeper they traveled, the quieter the world became. Even the wind seemed gentler here. Towering pines stretched toward the darkening sky while ancient moss clung to weathered stones like soft green blankets. Occasionally rabbits darted through the undergrowth. Red foxes watched from distant hills. Above the trees, a golden eagle circled silently. The mountain was alive. Not wild. Balanced. As though every creature understood its place. The wolves never hurried. Whenever Elena stumbled, the white she-wolf slowed her pace. When darkness settled fully across the forest, the pack finally reached a hidden valley surrounded by towering cliffs. Elena stopped in amazement. A crystal-clear lake rested at its center, reflecting thousands of stars across its perfectly still surface. Small waterfalls spilled gently from the surrounding rocks, their flowing water untouched by winter ice. Ancient oak trees circled the valley, their enormous branches stretching protectively over the peaceful clearing. Dozens more wolves rested there. Mothers curled beside playful cubs. Old wolves slept near warm natural springs rising from beneath the earth. Young wolves chased one another through patches of untouched snow before collapsing together in happy exhaustion. None appeared frightened. None appeared aggressive. It felt less like entering the home of predators, and more like discovering a forgotten village. The white she-wolf walked toward a smooth stone overlooking the lake. She climbed onto it gracefully before lifting her head toward the evening sky. One long howl floated across the valley. The sound was answered immediately. From every corner of the mountains. Dozens. Perhaps hundreds. Their voices rose together until the entire valley echoed with a song so haunting and beautiful that tears gathered in Elena's eyes. It did not sound like a call to hunt. It sounded like remembrance. Like a promise carried across generations. The following days changed Elena in ways she never expected. She no longer woke to servants shouting through castle corridors. Instead, she opened her eyes to birds greeting the sunrise from pine branches above her. She learned which berries remained safe beneath winter frost. She gathered herbs growing beside hidden streams. The wolves watched patiently as she stumbled through unfamiliar mountain paths, never mocking her mistakes, always waiting whenever she fell behind. Gradually, fear disappeared. Trust took its place. One frosty morning, a young wolf limped into the valley with a thorn buried deeply between its paw pads. The frightened animal whimpered whenever anyone approached. Elena slowly knelt several feet away. She said nothing. She simply waited. Minutes passed. The little wolf cautiously stepped closer. Another step. Finally, it stretched its injured paw toward her. She smiled softly. "Thank you." Carefully removing the thorn, she cleaned the tiny wound with herbs gathered earlier that morning. The young wolf licked her hand before bounding happily away. From across the valley, the white she-wolf watched everything. Her old eyes seemed filled with quiet approval. Spring tried to awaken the mountains. But something remained terribly wrong. One afternoon Elena followed a narrow stream toward the valley's edge. She frowned. The water barely flowed. Several fish floated lifelessly near the rocks. Nearby trees had begun shedding leaves far too early. Flowers wilted before blooming. Birdsong grew quieter each passing day. Even the wolves appeared restless. That evening the white she-wolf led Elena beyond the valley toward an ancient cliff overlooking nearly the entire kingdom. Greyhaven Castle stood far away upon its mountain. Smoke rose from village chimneys. Fields stretched across the valleys below. Yet even from this distance, Elena noticed patches of brown spreading through once green forests. Rivers looked thinner. Entire hillsides seemed strangely lifeless. The White Guardian released a quiet whine. Elena looked down at her. "You've been trying to show me." The wolf met her eyes. "The kingdom is dying." The she-wolf lowered her head once. A simple movement. Yet Elena understood. Whatever curse held Rowan beneath the castle no longer poisoned only one prisoner. It was slowly poisoning everything. Several days later, an old woodsman found the hidden valley. Unlike the frightened soldiers, he arrived alone. He carried no drawn weapon, only a walking staff and a small leather satchel. The wolves allowed him to approach. They knew him. His name was Garrick. His weathered face carried deep lines carved by countless winters spent wandering the mountains. When he saw Elena standing among the wolves, he smiled gently. "So," he said, "the stories were true. You know this place?" Elena asked. "I've known it since I was younger than you." He looked toward the white she-wolf with deep respect. "She was once called Era." Elena looked surprised. "You know her name?" Garrick nodded. "Era guarded King Rowan from the day he was born." He removed a small bundle wrapped in cloth from his satchel. Inside rested an ancient silver medallion engraved with the same royal crest Elena had seen upon Rowan's iron collar. "Wolves remember." The old woodsman's voice became quiet. "People forget." He sat beside the fire as evening settled across the valley. "The mountain has waited many years for someone like you." Elena looked into the dancing flames. "I'm only a servant." Garrick smiled sadly. So was every great soul, before someone needed them. He reached into another worn leather pouch and unfolded a brittle map. It showed the northern mountains in careful detail. Near the highest peak, a single place had been marked with faded ink. "The Shrine of First Dawn." "There," Garrick whispered, pointing to the ancient symbol. "The chains were forged there." Elena's heart quickened. "Then that's where we destroy them." The old woodsman's smile faded. If only it were that simple. The fire crackled between them. "The shrine holds the oldest magic in the kingdom. It answers only to sacrifice." "What kind of sacrifice?" Garrick hesitated, then quietly replied. "Someone whose heart carries no hatred must willingly surrender the thing they treasure most." Elena stared into the flames. She had already lost her parents, her home, her childhood. What remained? The old woodsman seemed to hear the question she never spoke. "It is never something you choose." His voice was almost a whisper. "The mountain chooses for you." A cold wind swept across the valley, bending the firelight toward the east. At that very moment, far below in Grey Haven, the castle bells began ringing. Not for celebration. For judgment. Garrick slowly stood, his face darkening as another traveler stumbled into the valley, exhausted and covered in snow. It was the stable boy from Grey Haven. His face was streaked with tears. He could barely catch his breath. "Elena," he gasped. "Lord Malric has arrested Brother Aldrin." He swallowed painfully. "And tomorrow?" His voice broke. "They're going to execute him in the castle square." The valley fell silent. The wolves lifted their heads together. Across the lake, Era's pale blue eyes met Elena's. The time for hiding had come to an end. The valley did not sleep that night. The wind carried the distant sound of Greyhaven's bells long after they had fallen silent, and every wolf remained awake beneath the towering pines. Some stood along the cliffs overlooking the kingdom below. Others paced slowly around the lake, their ears alert, as though they could already feel the storm gathering beyond the mountains. Elena sat beside the dying fire, unable to look away from the glowing embers. Brother Aldrin. She could still hear his calm voice inside the monastery library. Sometimes the heart begins searching before the mind understands why. He had protected the truth when almost everyone else had abandoned it. Now he was paying the price. Garrick quietly lowered himself onto the fallen log beside her. Neither of them spoke for several minutes. The silence felt kinder than empty words. Finally, the old woodsman reached into his satchel and placed a weathered leather bundle between them. Inside lay a short hunting knife, a coil of sturdy rope, a small pouch of dried herbs, and a thick wool cloak lined with wolf fur. "These belong to my daughter," he said softly. Elena looked up. "I can't take them." "You must." His weathered face carried both grief and peace. "She crossed these mountains helping strangers long before you were born." He smiled faintly. "I think she would be happy knowing someone else is walking the same path." Elena carefully folded the cloak across her lap. "Thank you." Garrick nodded toward the eastern horizon where clouds had begun swallowing the moon. "Tomorrow the mountain will ask something of you." She lowered her eyes. "I know." "No." His voice remained gentle. "You know it will be difficult." He looked toward the stars disappearing behind the storm. "You still don't know how difficult." Before dawn, the wolves gathered. Dozens of silent figures stood beneath the ancient pines, their thick coats dusted with fresh snow. At their front stood Era. The old white guardian looked older beneath the grey morning sky, yet her eyes burned with the same unwavering strength Elena had seen the day they first met. She stepped closer and pressed her forehead gently against Elena's shoulder. A farewell. Or perhaps a promise. Elena wrapped Garrick's cloak around herself and looked across the valley one final time. "This place feels like home." Garrick smiled. "Then make sure it still exists when you return." Without another word, the wolves turned toward the mountains. The journey back to Grey Haven had begun. Snow fell harder with every passing mile. The sky disappeared behind thick clouds that rolled across the peaks like dark waves. Wind screamed through narrow mountain passes, carrying sharp ice that stung Elena's face with every step. Yet the wolves never hesitated. They moved through the storm with quiet confidence, following trails invisible beneath the deep snow. By sunset, Grey Haven Castle appeared on the distant ridge. Its tall towers stood dark against the white landscape. Smoke drifted from hundreds of chimneys. Torches burned along the walls. Even from miles away, Elena could hear the low murmur of a frightened crowd gathering inside the castle square. Brother Aldrin's execution would take place at dawn. Malric wanted every villager to witness it. Fear was easier to rule than hope. Night settled over the kingdom. Clouds swallowed the stars. The first flashes of lightning flickered beyond the northern mountains. The wolves stopped within the shelter of the forest overlooking the castle. Era turned toward Elena. The old she-wolf looked into her eyes for several long moments before raising her nose toward the hidden western side of the fortress. Elena understood immediately. The forgotten tunnel. The same ancient passage used by the earliest kings during times of siege. Garrick had shown it to her on the faded map. Together they slipped through the forest. No barking dogs announced their arrival. No guards noticed the shadows moving beneath the trees. The storm itself seemed determined to hide them. Hidden beneath tangled roots and thick ivy, Elena found the entrance exactly where Garrick had described. A narrow stone arch disappeared into darkness beneath the mountain. Cold air drifted outward carrying the familiar scent of damp earth. The wolves waited outside. This path belonged to humans. Era stepped forward one final time. She touched Elena's hand with her nose. Then she looked toward the tunnel. "Go." Elena nodded. "I'll bring him home." The passage twisted beneath Grey Haven like the roots of an ancient tree. Water dripped steadily from the ceiling. Centuries-old torch brackets lined the walls, their flames long extinguished. Only Elena's lantern pushed back the darkness. Every echo sounded louder underground. Every breath seemed to belong to someone else. At last, she recognized the familiar hidden doorway leading toward the prison chamber. The same rusted ring. The same grinding stone. The same endless staircase. Only now, the air felt different. Heavier. The chains below rattled violently. Elena hurried down the worn steps. "Rowan." Her voice echoed through the darkness. The underground chamber answered with a deep, painful growl. She rounded the final pillar and stopped. The wolf struggled desperately against the enchanted chains. His breathing came in ragged bursts. Fresh blood covered the stone where iron had torn through his shoulders. The glowing symbols carved into each chain pulsed with faint crimson light. The curse knew she had returned. The great wolf lifted his head. His golden eyes found hers immediately. For the first time. Fear lived inside them. Not fear for himself. For her. "I'm here," Elena whispered, kneeling beside him. "I won't leave you again." The wolf pressed his forehead gently against her shoulder. His enormous body trembled. Outside the chamber, thunder rolled through the mountain. Dust drifted from the ceiling. The storm had reached Grey Haven. Elena quickly unpacked Garrick's bundle. Fresh herbs. Clean bandages. Water. She gently cleaned Rowan's wounds while the ancient chains continued glowing beneath her hands. The iron felt strangely warm. Almost alive. She remembered Brother Aldrin's words. The curse feeds upon hatred. Then another sentence returned to her. It weakens only when someone freely offers compassion where hatred is expected. She looked at the chains. Not with anger. With pity. How many years had they been forced to carry another man's cruelty? Her fingers rested lightly against the nearest iron link. Immediately, a blinding pain shot through her arm. She gasped. The chain glowed brighter. Visions flooded her mind. A great hall filled with music. King Rowan laughing among his people. Children running through sunlit gardens. Then, fire. Screams. Steel. Betrayal. Dark figures forcing a kneeling king toward the mountain prison. Magic twisting flesh into fur. Chains slamming shut. 30 years. 30 endless years. The vision vanished. Elena collapsed onto the stone floor, breathing hard. Tears streamed silently down her face. The wolf slowly lowered his head beside hers. As though apologizing. "You've been alone," she whispered. So terribly alone. Above them, Grey Haven prepared for another act of cruelty. The castle square overflowed with frightened villagers wrapped in heavy cloaks against the storm. Snow swirled around the execution platform. Brother Aldrin stood calmly upon the wooden scaffold. His hands were bound. His white robes fluttered in the freezing wind. Yet peace remained upon his weathered face. Lord Malric stepped before the crowd. Lightning flashed behind the castle towers, throwing long shadows across the square. "My people," he called. "For years traitors have hidden among us." His voice carried easily through the storm. "They spread lies. They worship monsters. They threaten the safety of this kingdom." He pointed toward Brother Aldrin. "Tonight justice is served." No one cheered. The villagers simply watched. Fear had stolen even their voices. Deep beneath the castle, another kind of judgment was beginning. The glowing chains suddenly tightened. Rowan cried out, the sound no longer fully wolf nor fully human. The underground chamber shook violently. Ancient symbols blazed across the iron. Elena stumbled backward. At the center of the floor, forgotten runes began glowing one after another, surrounding the chained wolf in a circle of silver light. She remembered Garrick's warning. The shrine answers only to sacrifice. Perhaps. The shrine had never been far away. Perhaps this prison itself had become part of its ancient magic. A quiet voice seemed to rise from the mountain itself. Not heard with ears. Felt inside the heart. Only what is freely given can never be taken. Elena closed her eyes. She finally understood. The curse had demanded hatred for 30 years. It could only be broken by someone willing to surrender love instead. Not life. Something even more precious. She looked at Rowan. The wolf met her gaze without moving. Almost as though he already knew. Almost as though he wanted to stop her. A gentle smile touched Elena's lips. "You've carried enough." She stepped into the circle of glowing runes. The light immediately surrounded her. Warm. Gentle. Ancient. She placed both hands upon the cold iron wrapped around Rowan's neck. "I have very little to give," she whispered. "My parents are gone. My childhood is gone. My home has never truly been mine." She closed her eyes. "But I still carry every happy memory they left me." The light brightened. "So take them. If that's the price. I give them willingly." The mountain answered. A brilliant wave of golden light burst through the underground chamber. The chains screamed. Not like metal. Like living things mourning their own ending. And far above, every wolf in the forest surrounding Greyhaven lifted its head toward the storm and released one thunderous howl that shook the kingdom to its very foundations. The howl rolled across the mountains like thunder given a voice. It swept over frozen rivers, through sleeping forests, and across every village tucked beneath Greyhaven's towering walls. Men and women stepped out of their homes despite the storm. Children clung to their parents' hands. Even the horses in the royal stables lifted their heads toward the mountain, ears fixed upon a sound they had never heard before. It was not a cry of war. It was a cry of awakening. Deep beneath the castle, the underground chamber blazed with ancient light. The glowing runes spread across the stone floor like streams of liquid gold. Every chain wrapped around the great black wolf trembled violently. Cracks raced through the rusted iron, each one releasing a soft silver glow that grew brighter with every heartbeat. Elena remained standing inside the circle. Her hands still rested against the heavy collar. The warmth surrounding her slowly changed. Memories began slipping away like autumn leaves carried downstream. She could still see her mother's face. But it was fading. The smell of warm bread cooling beside their little cottage window. Gone. Her father's laughter as he carried her through fields of wildflowers. Growing quieter. A single tear rolled down her cheek. She did not fight it. Some gifts became precious only because they were freely given. The light answered her sacrifice. One by one, the enchanted chains shattered. The first link struck the stone floor with a deafening crash. Then another. Then another. The sound echoed through the mountain until it seemed the castle itself was trembling. The collar around Rowan's neck split cleanly in two. For one suspended moment, complete silence filled the chamber. Then the wolf collapsed. Elena rushed forward, catching his massive head before it struck the stone. His breathing became uneven. The black fur covering his body shimmered beneath the ancient light. Bones shifted. The enormous paws slowly became human hands. The wolf's powerful frame changed shape as the curse unraveled thread by thread. The transformation carried no violence. Only release. Only freedom. When the light finally faded, a man lay where the chained wolf had been. His dark hair fell across his face. Fresh scars marked his shoulders where the chains had rested for decades. Though weakened by 30 stolen years, there remained something unmistakably regal in the quiet strength of his features. King Rowan had returned. His eyelids fluttered open. The same golden eyes met Elena's. Only now they held the warmth of a human soul no longer trapped behind a beast's form. For several heartbeats neither of them spoke. Words could not carry the weight of 30 years. Finally, Rowan whispered with a voice rough from long silence. "You stayed." Elena smiled through exhausted tears. "I promised." He slowly reached for her hand. Before his fingers could touch hers, a blade flashed through the darkness. Steel pierced Rowan's side. The king cried out and fell against the broken chains. Elena spun around. Lord Malric stepped from the shadows beyond the chamber entrance. His black cloak hung soaked with melting snow. Several armed guards stood behind him, their swords already drawn. His face twisted with fury rather than surprise. "So," he said quietly, "the stories were true after all." His gaze settled upon Rowan. "I should have finished what my father began." Elena stepped in front of the wounded king. "You imprisoned an innocent man." Malric laughed. "Innocent?" His voice echoed harshly through the chamber. "He was weak. He ruled with mercy. Kings who pity their people do not keep their crowns." He slowly lifted his sword. "My family built this kingdom." "No," Rowan answered, struggling to stand despite the blood staining his clothes. "You built your throne upon betrayal." Malric's expression hardened. "History belongs to whoever survives." He charged. The underground chamber erupted into chaos. His guards rushed forward, their boots splashing through shallow water pooled across the ancient floor. Elena grabbed a fallen torch pole, barely managing to block the first sword aimed toward Rowan. The impact nearly knocked her to the ground. She had never trained to fight. Every movement came from instinct, from determination, from refusing to let another innocent soul be taken from her. Above them, the storm reached its fury. Lightning split the sky. The mountain answered. A tremendous crash echoed through the hidden tunnels. Then came another sound. Running paws. Dozens of them. The secret passage exploded with motion as wolves poured into the underground chamber. Grey wolves. Black wolves. Young wolves. Old wolves. At their front ran Era. The White Guardian leaped between Elena and an attacking guard, knocking him backward before he could raise his sword again. The wolves did not attack wildly. They fought with astonishing precision. Disarming. Blocking. Driving the guards away from Rowan without needless killing. Several frightened soldiers threw down their weapons altogether. One whispered, "We were told they were monsters." Another looked around the chamber in disbelief. "They're protecting people." The lie that had ruled Greyhaven for 30 years began crumbling before their eyes. Far above, another battle was unfolding. The howls surrounding the castle had drawn the entire village into the square. No longer hiding inside their homes, the people gathered despite the storm. Stable hands. Blacksmiths. Farmers. Kitchen servants. Hunters. Old women leaning upon walking sticks. Children peeking from beneath wool blankets. Among them stood Marta the cook. The stable boy Elena had once comforted. The castle servants who had watched her spend years caring for wounded animals without expecting anything in return. Brother Aldrin remained upon the execution platform. His tired eyes lifted toward the mountains. A smile slowly crossed his face. "He lives," he whispered. The frightened crowd heard the wolves. They heard the thunder beneath the castle. Then, the ancient western tower cracked. A narrow line raced from its foundation to its highest window. Stone began falling. The forgotten prison beneath Greyhaven had finally broken. Panic swept through the square. Malric's remaining soldiers rushed to restore order, but something had changed. The people no longer stepped backward. They stepped forward. The blacksmith lowered his hammer beside Brother Aldrin's platform. "No more." The old hunter from the village stood beside him. "I've watched those wolves for months. They never harmed anyone." Another voice joined them. Then another. And another. Fear had ruled each person separately. Hope united them. Deep beneath the castle, Malric realized the battle was slipping away. His guards retreated one by one. Several refused to fight altogether. His eyes burned with desperate rage. "If I cannot have this kingdom." He raised his sword toward Elena. "No one will." He lunged. Before the blade reached her, Rowan stepped between them. Though still weakened, he caught Malric's sword with both hands. Steel rang against steel. The two men locked eyes. One ruled through fear. The other had survived because he never surrendered compassion. Malric struck again and again. Each blow grew more desperate. More reckless. Rowan defended without hatred. Without vengeance. Finally, Malric's foot slipped upon one of the shattered chains scattered across the stone floor. The broken iron he had once trusted to imprison another became his own undoing. His sword flew from his grasp. He fell hard against the ancient steps. Guards surrounded him. None moved to help. The captain slowly lowered his weapon. He removed the royal badge from Malric's cloak. "My lord," he said quietly, "my oath was to Greyhaven. Not to your lies." The chamber became silent. Malric looked toward the villagers now filling the tunnel entrance. Not one face showed loyalty. Only disappointment. The throne he had protected through fear had vanished in a single night because kindness had quietly built something stronger. Justice needed no executioner. It simply needed truth. Weeks passed. Winter slowly loosened its grip upon the mountains. Snow melted into clear streams that rushed joyfully through the valleys. The brown patches covering the forests disappeared as fresh green spread across the hillsides. Wildflowers returned. Birdsong filled the mornings once more. The great river beside Greyhaven, nearly dry only weeks before, flowed full and bright beneath the spring sun. Children laughed along its banks. Fishermen returned to work. The kingdom breathed again. Brother Aldrin, though weakened by imprisonment, resumed caring for the monastery library. This time, no hidden records remained hidden. The true history of King Rowan was copied by scribes and carried to every village in the realm. No child would grow up believing the lie again. The broken western tower was never rebuilt. Instead, Rowan ordered the entrance left open. Not as a prison. As a place of remembrance. Fresh flowers appeared there every spring. No one ever discovered who placed the first bouquet upon the ancient stones. Some believed it was the servants. Others believed it was the villagers. Brother Aldrin simply smiled whenever anyone asked. The mountain remembers. King Rowan refused a grand coronation. Instead, he walked through every village on foot. He listened before speaking. He shared meals inside humble cottages. He thanked the farmers who had survived years of hunger. He knelt beside children frightened by wolves and gently introduced them to Era's pack. Soon fear gave way to laughter. The wolves no longer watched Greyhaven from the forest's edge. They walked openly beside its people. Not as rulers. Not as pets. As guardians. One quiet evening, Rowan climbed the hill overlooking the valley where Elena stood watching dozens of wolf cubs tumbling through fresh spring grass. The setting sun painted the mountains gold. "You saved my life," Rowan said softly. Elena smiled without looking away from the playful cubs. "I only gave you a chance to save your own." He stood beside her. For a while, neither spoke. The silence felt comfortable. Peaceful. Finally Rowan asked, "What did the mountain take from you?" Elena hesitated. She searched her heart. "I know I loved my parents." Her voice barely rose above the evening breeze. "I remember that they were kind." She smiled sadly. "But I can no longer remember the sound of their voices." Rowan looked toward the distant horizon. No words could return what had been given. Instead, he gently placed a small wooden carving into her hands. It showed a little cottage surrounded by wildflowers. Two wolves rested peacefully beside its door. "You cannot recover every memory," he said. "But from this day forward, you'll never have to face tomorrow alone." Tears filled Elena's eyes. Not from sorrow. From belonging. Years later, travelers crossing the northern mountains often spoke of Greyhaven. They told stories of a wise king whose greatest strength was mercy. Of wolves who guided lost children safely home during snowstorms. Of forests so alive that birds greeted strangers before sunrise. And of a quiet woman known throughout the kingdom as the keeper of the wild. People claimed wounded animals somehow found their way to her. They said frightened wolves became gentle beneath her touch. Some even whispered that the mountain itself listened whenever she walked among its ancient trees. Whether those stories were true hardly mattered. Because everyone knew the one story that mattered most. A forgotten king had been saved not by armies. Not by magic. Not by revenge. But by the simple courage of one young servant who refused to believe that anyone was beyond compassion. And whenever the full moon rose above Greyhaven Castle, wolves gathered peacefully upon the hills, lifting their voices toward the stars, not in mourning, but in gratitude, reminding every generation that kingdoms built upon fear eventually fall, while those built upon kindness are remembered long after the last stone has turned to dust.